The evening had a sharp bite to it, the kind of cold that made you wish for heavy coats and warm drinks. He'd been cooped up in his apartment, scrolling through his phone, thinking about ordering something to eat, when he heard the faint but insistent grunts and the scraping of furniture from next door. At first, he ignored it. Neighbors often moved things in the evenings. He'd done it himself a few times, knowing the sound of struggle wasn't unusual. But then there was a sudden, more urgent thump, followed by a frustrated sigh that sounded like someone close to giving up. Curiosity got the better of him. He slipped on his shoes, shrugged into a hoodie, and padded to the door. Peeking out, he saw her, his neighbor, the woman from down the hall, the one who had always seemed so self-contained and busy. She was mid-30s, maybe 40, with long brunette hair pulled into a practical ponytail, wearing a worn sweatshirt and jeans. Her face, normally so composed when he passed her in the hallway, now looked tense with the effort of shifting a couch that clearly wasn't going anywhere on its own. "Need a hand?" he asked, stepping into the chilly hall. His breath came out in little white puffs. She froze for a moment, as if surprised he had noticed. Then she glanced at the couch, then back at him, and let out a small laugh, one that carried equal parts embarrassment and relief. Yes, please," she admitted, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I didn't realize how heavy this old thing was." The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and home-cooked meals, a stark contrast to the sharp winter air outside. As he stepped in, he noticed the details, the carefully arranged photos on the shelf, the smell of vanilla candles, a cozy throw draped over a chair. It was lived in, warm, and inviting, but right now the space was dominated by the large, bulky couch. "All right," he said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's see what we're dealing with." They approached it together, assessing the awkward angles. She tried lifting one end and he took the other, and immediately the weight made them stagger slightly. A cold draft came in through the slightly open window, causing him to shiver, and he noticed the same reaction in her. Their hands brushed for a second as they readjusted their grip. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling back. "No problem," he said, but he couldn't quite shake the warmth that lingered where their hands had touched. It was a fleeting, electric moment, but enough to make him notice her eyes in a different way, the way the light caught in them, the depth in her gaze, the slight tension of her lips as she concentrated. They moved the couch through the narrow hallway, navigating door frames and corners. With each turn, each lift, each grunt, they fell into a rhythm, a silent teamwork that made the work slightly easier. He started noticing little things, the way her hair fell over her shoulder when she bent down, the small laugh she let out when the couch tilted too far one way, the way her breath came in quick, shallow bursts from the effort. At one point the couch caught on the doorway, and they both groaned. "Okay, maybe we go a bit slower," he suggested, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. She nodded, and as they readjusted their stance, he caught her watching him for just a moment, as if gauging his strength, his patience, maybe something else entirely. That tiny glance, so fleeting, sent a strange flutter through his chest. He tried to focus, told himself it was just the work, just the cold, just the awkward proximity, but the thought of it lingered. Finally, they managed to maneuver the couch into place. Both of them leaned against it for a moment, breathing heavily, flushed from the exertion. She laughed softly, a sound that made the room feel warmer than any heater could. "Thanks," she said, looking at him in a way that felt different from before. Not just neighborly thanks, but something softer, more intimate, though she quickly masked it with a shrug. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You did most of it," he teased, smiling. "I'm just the heavy-lifting backup." She chuckled again, and there was a pause, a moment where neither of them moved, where the simple act of being close seemed to stretch time. He noticed the way her hand lingered near the couch as if she weren't quite ready to let go. "I actually owe you," she said after a while, her voice quieter now. "I was going to try and manage on my own, but it would have taken forever." "You don't have to owe me," he said, shrugging, though his heart beat a little faster than usual. Neighbors help neighbors, right? That's all it was, just neighbors. But then she smiled at him in that way, soft, appreciative, eyes holding a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold outside, And he felt something more. The room was quiet except for their breathing, the faint hum of the heater in the corner. He noticed how the evening light from the window cast a glow over her hair, making the brunette's strands almost shimmer. She glanced at him, then down at the floor, and something in the shift of her gaze made him realize just how close they were standing. "You've got strong arms," she said, almost absent-mindedly, as if the observation had just slipped out. He laughed, brushing the comment off, but inside he felt a small thrill. "Yeah, I've been told that before." Her laugh came again, and it was lighter this time, mingled with something that felt teasing but genuine. "Well, I should remember that next time I have to move furniture. Maybe I'll just call you." "You'll be careful though," he said, his voice playful, his eyes locking with hers. "Wouldn't want to ruin your back again." "I think I could manage," she said, but her smile faltered just a little, the way someone notices a shared moment and wants it to linger. And linger it did. They spent the next few minutes rearranging smaller pieces of furniture, shifting a chair here, a table there, laughing when things didn't quite fit, complaining together when corners and legs caught on walls. It wasn't just the physical proximity that made his heart beat faster. It was the subtle touches, the casual brushes of hands, the shared laughter, the quiet conversation that didn't need to be anything more than simple neighborly banter, but somehow felt charged with something unspoken. At last, the apartment looked right. The couch was in place, the rug straightened, the small table perfectly aligned. They both leaned back, taking a moment to admire the effort. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said again, but this time there was no brushing it off, no awkward laugh to mask the sincerity. He nodded, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a sharp reminder of the cold, but inside, the warmth of the room and of her presence felt like its own kind of heat. And just like that, something shifted. A subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of closeness, of intimacy born from a shared effort on a cold evening. He realized, as he looked at her, how easy it had been to fall into rhythm together, how natural the closeness felt, and how much he wanted to see her smile just like that again. The evening stretched on. They moved to the small kitchen, where she insisted on making tea as a thank you. While the kettle boiled, they talked more casually about work, kids, mundane stories of the day, but even the small talk was different now. There was a softness, an unspoken familiarity that hadn't existed before. When she handed him the steaming mug, their hands touched again, lingering just a second longer than necessary. He noticed the warmth of her skin, the faint scent of vanilla and lavender in her hair, and he realized he hadn't just been helping her move furniture. He'd been stepping into a space that was suddenly charged with possibility, with the hint of something that could grow if they let it. And outside, the night settled in, cold and indifferent. But inside, there was a warmth neither of them could ignore. The tea was hot, steaming between their hands as they sank into the couch, her couch, now perfectly in place, and settled into the quiet comfort of the room. He took a sip, letting the warmth spread through his chest, but his attention kept drifting to her. She was sitting close enough that their knees almost touched, but not so close as to be obvious, just the right distance to make him notice. "So, you really do this often? Help neighbors move furniture?" she asked, her tone light, teasing, but with a trace of curiosity. "Not usually," he admitted, smiling. "But you seemed like you needed it." She laughed softly, the sound low and melodic. "I guess I did. I didn't realize it would be such a workout, though. Honestly, I might be sore tomorrow." "I can help with that," he said lightly, leaning back a little, trying not to sound too forward, but something in the way she looked at him made him think he could push the boundary. Her eyes softened, and for a moment he caught a flicker of something: appreciation, admiration, maybe even desire. "I might take you up on that," she said, almost as if testing him, but there was a smile playing on her lips that made his chest tighten. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, sipping tea, listening to the wind whistling outside. But the silence wasn't empty, it was full of small signals, tiny gestures, the way she brushed a lock of hair behind her ear, the subtle stretch of her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the mug handle a little longer than necessary. He felt drawn in, aware of the closeness between them, the unspoken tension that had begun to settle in the room. "So, do you usually hang out in the evenings like this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Not really," she said, a little hesitant, glancing toward him. "Most evenings I'm with the kids, or working on stuff. But tonight it just felt like I could use some help. And company, I guess." "Company, huh?" he repeated, tilting his head slightly. "I think I can provide that." Her laugh was soft, tinged with amusement and something he couldn't quite identify. She looked at him in a way that made his stomach flip, like she was measuring him, seeing if he was paying attention not just to her words but to her presence, to the energy between them. "Maybe," she said, her voice low, carrying a subtle warmth. "I mean, it's nice. But you make the hard stuff feel easier." He swallowed, feeling that familiar flutter in his chest. "I'm glad," he said, a little breathlessly, realizing he hadn't intended for it to come out that way. "Honestly, it's nice being here with you." Her gaze lingered, and suddenly the air felt heavier, charged. He noticed the way her fingers drummed lightly against the mug, the way her eyes seemed to search his, and he realized they were no longer talking about furniture or the cold. They were talking, in silence, about something else entirely. Without thinking, he shifted slightly closer. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that the warmth from her body brushed against his arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes followed the movement, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming on her lips. "Are you always this brave?" she asked softly, her tone teasing, but there was a softness there that made him pause. "Brave?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she said, leaning back slightly, but keeping her eyes on him. "Helping me move that couch, getting this close, not running away when things feel intense." He chuckled, feeling a thrill at her words. "I'm not scared of a little intensity," he said, and the double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. She laughed again, the sound low and inviting, and he felt a pull he hadn't expected. The room was quiet except for the kettle still simmering, the faint hum of the heater, and the subtle rhythm of their shared breaths. He noticed every little detail, the curve of her jaw, the soft slope of her shoulders, the way her eyes held his when she spoke. He realized that the moment had shifted. It was no longer just a friendly evening helping a neighbor. It had become something more, something electric, something that neither of them could quite name but both could feel. "Do you want to sit closer?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, uncertain but daring at the same time. Her eyes widened just a fraction, and then she nodded, almost imperceptibly. Slowly, she moved a bit nearer until their sides brushed. Not awkwardly, not forced, just naturally, like the space between them had been waiting to be filled. "Better?" he asked softly, aware of the warmth radiating from her body. "Yes," she said, almost breathless, a small shiver running through her. "Much better." The words hung between them, and he realized how close they had come without even noticing. The evening, the cold, the physical effort, it had all brought them here, to this quiet, intimate moment. He could feel the tension in his chest, the subtle pull of desire, the unspoken question of what might happen next. He reached out, almost tentatively, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let it happen, her eyes softening under his gaze. It was a small touch, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. "You didn't expect this," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile connection between them. "Neither did I," he admitted, his heart racing, every instinct telling him to lean in, to close the small gap between them. And then, without a word, he did. He leaned in slightly, just enough to feel the warmth of her presence, just enough to see the soft curve of her lips. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, meeting him halfway, and the closeness between them became something more, a silent agreement, a mutual recognition of desire and tension that had built over the course of a cold evening spent moving furniture and sharing laughter. They lingered there, suspended in the moment, until a sudden sound, the clatter of a mug on the counter, brought them back to the present. Both of them laughed, breaking the tension, but the connection remained, unspoken but undeniable. "You know," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, more intimate. "I'm glad you were here tonight. Not just for the couch." "I know," he said, feeling a grin spread across his face. "Me too." They sat back, sipping their tea, the warmth spreading through them, both physical and emotional. The night outside had grown colder, but inside, the apartment felt like its own little world, a cocoon of shared warmth and unexpected closeness. And in that quiet, cozy space, both of them knew that whatever had started with moving a couch had shifted into something far more significant. Something neither of them could fully name, but both of them could feel: a spark, a connection, a moment that promised more if they were brave enough to follow it. The room had settled into a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the occasional sip of tea and the hum of the heater. Yet the air between them was far from ordinary. Every glance, every small movement, carried weight. He could feel it in the brush of her sleeve against his arm, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the space between them, the soft warmth radiating from her side. "So, you don't often get called over to help a neighbor move furniture in the evening?" she asked, breaking the silence, her voice casual but her eyes locking on his with an intensity that made him shiver. "Not usually," he admitted, leaning back slightly, though keeping his gaze fixed on her. "But I guess tonight was different." She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that sent an unexpected thrill through him. "Different, huh? I guess moving a couch is more exciting when you have company." "Company makes everything better," he said, his voice low. "Even heavy furniture in the cold." Her laugh was soft, playful, and he noticed how it seemed to linger in the room. She shifted slightly on the couch, just enough that their knees touched again. Neither pulled away. Instead, they let the small contact linger, a subtle acknowledgement of the closeness between them. "You make it sound like you actually enjoyed it," she said, raising an eyebrow, her tone teasing but her eyes warm. "I did," he said honestly. "I enjoyed this." He gestured vaguely between them, unsure how to put the feeling into words. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. He noticed the slight parting of her lips, the way her breath hitched just a little as she leaned back, a subtle shiver running through her. It wasn't the cold this time. It was the closeness, the tension, the unspoken attraction that had been building all evening. "You know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't expect tonight to be like this." "Like this?" he asked, leaning just slightly closer, drawn by the softness in her tone. "Like this?" she repeated, her gaze dropping for a moment, then lifting again, meeting his eyes. There was a vulnerability there, an openness that made his chest tighten. Close. Comfortable. And something else I can't quite name. He smiled, a little breathlessly, and shifted again, just enough that their arms brushed. The contact sent a jolt through him, a spark that seemed to ignite every nerve ending. "I know exactly what you mean," he said, his voice low, intimate. "I feel it too." For a moment, neither moved. They just sat there, letting the silence stretch, feeling the tension, the warmth, the connection. The evening outside had grown darker, the wind harsher, but inside, the room felt insulated from everything. It was just them, the soft glow of the lamps, the quiet hum of the heater, and the closeness that had grown naturally over the course of the night. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing his again, and he felt a pull so strong he had to resist the urge to close the distance entirely. Instead, he let his hand rest lightly on his knee, close enough that she could see it, feel it, without making the move too obvious. "You're really good at this," she said suddenly, her voice soft, almost shy, but with a hint of teasing. "Helping. Being here. Making it easy." "I'm good at making things easy," he replied, his voice a little husky now, the truth of his attraction slipping out despite his efforts to stay casual. "Especially when it matters." Her eyes softened, and the small smile she gave him was enough to make his heart race. The way she looked at him, the way she leaned just slightly toward him, made it clear that the moment had shifted again. It was no longer just about moving furniture or sharing a quiet evening. It was about them, the closeness, the unspoken desire that neither wanted to acknowledge too loudly but both could feel. He let his gaze linger on her face, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the softness of her lips, the subtle arch of her eyebrows. Every small detail seemed amplified in the quiet intimacy of the room. And then, almost without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek again, letting his fingers linger slightly longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, closing her eyes for a brief moment, and he felt a thrill run through him. The subtle contact, the warmth of her skin, the soft shiver that ran through her, all of it combined to make the moment electric. She started, her voice faltering slightly. I didn't expect this either. Sitting like this, so close. Me neither, he said, leaning a little closer, his voice soft, intimate. But I'm glad we are. Her eyes opened slowly, meeting his, and the room seemed to shrink around them. The cold outside, the hum of the heater, the distant sounds of the city, they all faded away, leaving just the two of them, suspended in the quiet intimacy of the evening. Without another word, he closed the small distance between them, just enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder against his chest. She leaned slightly into him, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and he felt the electricity of the moment tighten around them. "You're warm," she said softly, almost a whisper, and he felt a thrill at the sound of her voice so close. "You too," he replied, his lips curving into a small, almost shy smile. They sat like that for a few long moments, the quiet tension building, until she shifted slightly, turning her head toward him. Their faces were close now, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath, close enough that the next step was almost inevitable. "You don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice low, intimate. "I've never been this close to anyone like this before." "You don't have to do anything," he said softly, his hand brushing lightly against hers, fingers almost touching. "We can just be here." But even as he said it, he felt the pull, the desire, the unspoken question hanging between them. The evening had started with a simple act of neighborly help, but now it had transformed into something far more potent. A closeness that neither could ignore, a tension that demanded acknowledgement. She let out a soft breath, leaning slightly closer again, and he felt the heat of her body, the subtle brush of her hair against his cheek. It was intoxicating, and he realized he didn't want the moment to end. Not yet. "I like this," she whispered, her lips just a breath away from his. "Being close like this feels right." He smiled, his heart racing, and leaned in just a fraction more. "It does," he said, barely above a whisper, his lips so close to hers that he could feel the warmth of her breath. And then, finally, the unspoken tension broke. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, soft and careful at first, as if testing the waters. But the moment quickly deepened, becoming something more urgent, more electric, as if the closeness of the evening, the shared effort, and the warmth of the room had built to this singular, undeniable point. She responded immediately, her lips moving against his with a softness that belied the intensity of the moment. His hand found her waist, drawing her closer, and she let out a small, breathy laugh against his mouth, a sound that made his heart pound even faster. For a long moment, they stayed like that, lost in the intensity of the kiss, the warmth, the closeness, the shared heartbeat of two people who had stumbled into something far beyond simple neighborly kindness. And when they finally pulled back, just slightly, their foreheads resting together, they both knew, without a word, that the night had changed them. The cold outside, the heavy furniture, the mundane beginnings of the evening, all of it had led to this moment. And neither of them wanted to go back. They stayed close for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing mingling in the warmth of the small living room. The city outside had grown quiet, the cold now just a distant memory compared to the heat that pulsed between them. He could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath his palm, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the gentle warmth of her body pressed near his. "I wasn't expecting this tonight," she whispered, her voice low and vulnerable. "I didn't think helping me move a couch could lead to this." He smiled softly, brushing a hand along her arm. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But I'm glad it did." Her eyes softened, a subtle vulnerability in their depth that made his chest ache with something unfamiliar yet compelling. She tilted her head slightly, her lips brushing against his cheek in a feather-light kiss. "I'm glad you're here," she said again, her voice barely audible, "more than I realized." He swallowed, feeling the tension coiling tighter, a mix of desire and tenderness. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured, closing the small gap between them once more, letting his lips find hers in another kiss. This one was slower, deliberate, savoring the softness, the warmth, the closeness. Her arms tentatively wrapped around his shoulders, and he felt a subtle shiver run through her, a mix of excitement and uncertainty that mirrored his own. As the minutes stretched, they explored the closeness between them with gentle touches and quiet laughter, the kind that only forms when comfort and attraction collide. She leaned into him, her hair brushing against his cheek, her hand finding his on her waist. He marveled at the intimacy of it, not just the kiss, not just the physical closeness, but the sense of trust and ease that had grown over a simple act of neighborly help. "Do you ever think about what might happen if we didn't stop?" she asked softly, her voice a breathy whisper that made him catch his own. "I've thought about it," he admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "But we don't have to rush. We can just enjoy this moment." She nodded, a small, content smile tugging at her lips. "I like this moment," she said, her hands lingering on his shoulders, tracing light, teasing patterns that sent a thrill down his spine. "I like being close to you. It feels safe and exciting." He chuckled softly, a sound low and intimate. "Safe and exciting. That's a good combination." They spent the next while simply sitting together, arms wrapped loosely, heads leaning against each other, talking in low tones about trivial things, the day, work, the chaos of her kids, but every word, every laugh, every subtle brush of skin against skin carried weight. The physical intimacy was there, yes, but it was intertwined with something deeper: connection, attraction, trust, and an unspoken curiosity about what they could become together. At some point, she shifted slightly, turning toward him more fully. Their legs brushed, and he felt the electric charge of it. "I've never felt like this before," she confessed softly, eyes searching his. "So connected, so drawn to someone." "Neither have I," he admitted, his hand brushing the back of her neck lightly, feeling the softness of her hair, the warmth of her skin. "But it feels natural, doesn't it?" She nodded, leaning into his touch, and for a long moment, neither spoke. They just existed in the closeness, in the warmth, in the quiet intimacy that had blossomed from a cold evening, heavy furniture, and a willingness to help. When they finally stood, hesitantly, reluctantly, she smiled up at him, a mixture of playfulness and something more profound. "I guess I should thank you properly," she said, her eyes sparkling. "For everything tonight." He grinned. "You don't need to thank me." "But," he paused, feeling the urge to bridge the distance one last time. "Maybe I'd like to see you again like this. Not just moving furniture, but, spending time with you." Her gaze softened, a shy, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "I'd like that," she said, and just like that, the words hung between them, simple but loaded with meaning. The evening outside had grown colder still, the wind pressing against the windows, but they no longer noticed. They lingered at the threshold of her apartment, reluctant to let the night end. The brief brush of hands as they parted, the warmth of shared smiles, the subtle tension that promised more, it all made the cold irrelevant. "Next time," she said softly, stepping back, "maybe we can skip the heavy lifting and just enjoy some tea together." "I'd like that," he replied, his voice low, carrying the warmth he felt. "Very much." They shared one last glance, a long, lingering look that spoke volumes. Words were unnecessary. The closeness, the connection, the spark of desire and curiosity, those were enough. And in that quiet, intimate moment, they both knew that the evening had changed something fundamental between them. The door closed behind him as he left, the cold air hitting his face, but it didn't matter. The warmth of the night lingered in his chest, a glowing memory of the closeness, the laughter, the shared effort, the quiet intimacy that had begun with a couch and a simple act of kindness. And somewhere inside he knew, without needing to say it aloud, that this was only the beginning. The evening had started with work, cold and casual neighborly help, but it ended with intimacy, connection, and unspoken possibilities. Both of them were changed by the night. The pull of attraction, the comfort of closeness, and the thrill of discovering something unexpected in someone so familiar yet suddenly electrifying. They didn't know what the future held, but for that cold evening, they had found warmth, understanding, and the spark of something real. And that, perhaps, was enough to carry them forward into whatever came next.